This video is about some review problems for quiz 1 of unit 8. So let's talk about parallelograms first. So determine if the figure is a parallelogram, explain why or why not. So number 1, remember these markings show that these angles that are opposite are congruent, and these opposite angles are also congruent. And because we have two sets of opposite angles congruent, this is a parallelogram. So we would say yes, and then show what property to use. So because two sets of opposite angles are congruent. Now, number 2, when we look, we have consecutive angles. So here and here, we need to know if these are supplementary or not. Well, 122 plus 48 is only 170 degrees. So the consecutive angles are not supplementary, so this is not a parallelogram. So we would say no, because two sets of consecutive angles are not supplementary. In number 3, remember that the arrows mean that the lines are parallel, and then we have two tick marks on each, which means that they're congruent. So remember, if that happens on the same set of lines, this is one example of a parallelogram. So we would say yes, because one set of opposite sides is both parallel and congruent. Number 4, based on the diagram, Cubs is a parallelogram because looking at our diagonals, these circles mean that that diagonal is bisected, and those tick marks mean the other diagonal is bisected, so they're bisecting each other. So because the diagonals bisect each other. Remember, once we know that the diagonals bisect each other, all properties of a parallelogram are true. So in this case, we know that the opposite sides are congruent to each other. So to solve for x, we would have 21x minus 9 equals 9x plus 21. So in order to solve, I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. So I get 12x minus 9 equals 21. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So 12x equals 30. When I divide by 12, I know that this is not divisible, so I'm just going to reduce by taking 6 out of each. So x is 5 over 2, or we could say 2.5. Number 5, BEAR, bear, is a parallelogram. So solve for x and then find BA. So we know that ES is 6x minus 2, SA is 7x plus 1, and RS is 4x plus 10. So remember, in a parallelogram, the diagonals bisect each other. So they have no relationship from one diagonal to the other. We just know they bisect each other. So to solve for x, we would use the 4x plus 10 and the 6x minus 2. So we have 4x plus 10 equals 6x minus 2. We're going to subtract 4x from both sides and then add 2 to both sides. So we get 12 equals 2x. When we divide, x is 6. The last thing we need to find is BA. So remember, BA is this whole diagonal covered in red now. So if SA is 7x plus 1, well, 7 times 6 plus 1 is 43. That means that SB is also 43. So BA is equal to 43 plus 43, which gets us 86. Number 6, hawk is a parallelogram. Solve for x and y. So first, we know that where the x's are opposite angles, so those are congruent. So we have 8x minus 12 equals 3x plus 58. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So 5x minus 12 equals 58. Then we're going to add 12 to both sides. So we get 5x equals 70. And when we divide, 70 divided by 5, we get x is 14. Now that we know x is 14, we can substitute into an angle. So let's do 8 times 14 minus 12 gets us 100. We know the relationship between the consecutive angles is that they're supplementary. So if the angle at the top is 100 degrees, we have 100 plus 3y plus 11 equals 180. We can combine like terms, so 3y equals 111, or plus 111 equals 180. Subtract 111 from both sides, and we get 3y equals 69. When we divide by 3, y is 23. Number 7, BULS is a parallelogram. So we're going to draw a picture. We have BULS. When you label your parallelogram, remember to go in a circle. Doesn't matter which way you go in the circle, but do not pick up your pencil and switch corners to label your letters. So we have BU is 5x minus 2, UL is 3x plus 9, and LS is 2x plus 7. Remember, in a parallelogram, your opposite sides are congruent. So to solve for x, we would say 5x minus 2 is equal to 2x plus 7. We're going to subtract 2x from both sides and add 2 to both sides. When we divide, we get x is 3. Now that we know x is 3, we can get our side lengths. So 5 times 3 minus 2 is 13. 3 times 3 plus 9 is 18. 2 times 3 plus 7 is 13. And this other side, SB, doesn't have a length. But remember, our opposite sides are congruent, so this is also 18. So to get the perimeter, we would add 13 plus 18 plus 13 plus 18. And when we add those together, we get 62. Now let's move on to rectangles. So remember that rectangles have all the properties of a parallelogram, and then they also have the properties of 4 right angles, and the diagonals bisect each other. So number 8, it's important to remember the diagonals bisect each other into 4 congruent parts, so that we have isosceles triangles. So we know if 61 is in the corner, then my 2 triangles on the left and right all have base angles of 61 degrees. To find the other angles missing in the corner by R, E, C, and T, we know that they are right angles. So we're going to subtract the angle we know from 90 to get our missing angles. So 90 minus 61 is 29. So all of these angles are 29 degrees. To get the angles in the middle of our triangle, to use the triangle at the top, we have an isosceles triangle. Remember that all the measures in the triangle are 180, so 180 minus the 2 measures we already know. So 180 minus 29 would get us 122 degrees in the top and the bottom triangle. On the triangle on the left and right, we're going to use the same idea and subtract from 180. So 180 minus 61 would get us 58 degrees. In number 9, solve for x and y. So remember that in a rectangle, our opposite sides are still congruent. So we would have 4x plus 5y equals 35. And we'd have 4x minus 5y equals 5. So right away, I notice that my y's cancel out. I'm just going to add straight down. So 8x equals 40. Divide, and we get x is 5. Once you know x is 5, we need to go back to one of the equations and substitute. So we're going to do 4 times 5 plus 5y equals 35. 20 plus 5y equals 35. When I subtract 20 from both sides, I get 15. 5y equals 15. Divide, and y is 3. So our ordered pair would be 5, 3. Number 10, ABCD is a rectangle. Solve for x. Is ABCD also a square? So right now, if it's a rectangle, we know that there are 4 right angles. So we're going to use that idea to solve for x. So 18x equals 90. When I divide, we get that x is 5. So now I need to know if x is 5, is it a square? So remember, to be a square, we have to have congruent sides. So we're going to put 5 into both sides. 6 times 5 minus 2 is 28. 5 times 5 plus 3 is also 28, which means that all of our sides are going to be 28 and congruent. So this would be a square. So we would say, yes, ABCD is a square because it has a right angle and 4 congruent sides. Now let's move to a rhombus. Remember, a rhombus has the properties of a parallelogram. It also bisects the opposite angles. The diagonals are perpendicular to each other, and there's 4 congruent sides. So number 11, we want to find all the angles. So MH is bisecting the angles. So if part of that's 39, all of these angles have to be 39 degrees because opposite angles are congruent and they were all bisected. Remember that diagonals are also perpendicular. So we know that there are always forming right angles in the center. To find the missing angles, we know that the angles by R and O have to be congruent to each other. So if we take one of these triangles, we know that the measure in a triangle is 180 degrees. So we can do 180 minus 90 minus 39, and we get 51 degrees. So all of the remaining angles are 51 degrees. In number 12, it tells us that RSM is x squared minus 9x. It also tells us that OHS is 7y minus 2, and RHS is 40. So to solve for x and y, remember that the diagonals are perpendicular to each other. So they're forming right angles in the center. So x squared minus 9x equals 90. We're going to subtract 90 from both sides, so 9x minus 90 equals 0. So I need two numbers that multiply to negative 9d and add to negative 9. So we have x minus 15 and x plus 6. To get what x is equal to, we're going to switch our signs. And both of those numbers work because it would make our angle positive. To solve for y, remember that the diagonal is bisecting the angles. So we would have 7y minus 2 is equal to 40. So 7y is equal to 42, and we divide, y is 6. Number 13, ABCD is a rhombus. Is it a square? So remember that in a rhombus, we have 4 congruent sides. So we're going to set 3x plus 21 is equal to 4x minus 2. So we can subtract 3x from both sides, and we get 21 equals x minus 2. Add 2 to both sides, we get x is 23. Now, to show if it's a square, we would need to have a right angle with that angle measure they gave us. So we're going to put 23 in for x. So 5 times 23 minus 6 gets us 109, which means that this is not a square because there's no right angle. So ABCD is not a square because it contains no right angles. Squares. So as a review, remember that squares have the properties of a rhombus, a rectangle, and a parallelogram. So in number 14, remember that our diagonals are perpendicular. Also, the corners are perpendicular, so they're making 90-degree angles. The thing to remember, though, is that the diagonal is bisecting all of these angles into 45 degrees. So to solve for x, we would set 2x minus 13 equal to 45. We're going to add 13 on both sides, and we get 58. And when we divide by 2, x is 29. To solve for y, we know that they were perpendicular in the center, so 10y is equal to 90 degrees because they made right angles. When we divide by 10, we get y is 9. In number 15, solve for x and y. So remember in 15, all of our sides are congruent. So we have 4x plus 16 equals 30. We also have 9x minus 3y equals 30. So in the first equation, there's just an x, so I can solve for that first. So we get 4x equals 14. And when we divide by 4, we get x is 3.5. Then we can substitute that in for x to get y. So we have 9 times 3.5 minus 3y equals 30. So we get 31.5 minus 3y equals 30. We can subtract 31.5 from both sides, so negative 3y equals negative 1.5. We divide, y is just 0.5.